We're live. Folks are starting to come in here. Welcome. We got Toxey Hayes and Dudley Phelps from Mossy Oak. We're going to be talking, land management and being a 365 gamekeeper. So we're going to give it a few minutes here. Make sure we give folks some time to trickle in. But Toxey, you were just talking about some corn you planted for some waterfowl, and you're struggling with some drought, huh?
Yes, we are really struggling with drought, and it's so spotty. The farm there is probably on a straight line, isn't but 10 miles north of here. And we've had probably 3 inches of rain in town in the last 6 weeks and not a drop out there. It's just the cruelty of summer weather.
Yeah, I've had to start watering some stuff. I normally don't go out and water trees. That's kind of one of my things. It's planted at the right time and do all of that. But there's a few I'm having to tend to, some special ones.
You can't take a chance on shoulder muscles, Dudley, or you utilize the 4-wheeler?
No, just stuff that's closer that I can get a hose to or something like that.
Nice.
Some people shoulder water in. That's not.
If we didn't have the next forecast we have, he would be not smiling and laughing about it right now. He would be in emergency mode. How big a tank can we put a hose to and make it mobile and get to this stuff? He would be, because it's getting bad. But I see relief over the top of the building.
Yeah.
So this is you guys are very abnormally dry for this time of year.
Yes.
Yeah. It's been worse. I mean, I've seen worse in my lifetime, but it's really early for it to get so dry.
I would say it's as bad as I've ever seen in June. Yes. But, we'll see. I hope, you can always tell when it's coming to even a 10% chance of rain kind of vaporizes from the forecast. They're pretty good. I mean, the modeling and the good grief today and artificial intelligence has added to it is good, but summer still is so unpredictable for even the best. I looked at it this morning, and one weather service had 20%, one had 80%, one had 30%, one had 15%, one had 34%. So that just tells you what's going on with predicting summer weather sometimes.
Total crapshoot. Well, we got quite a few folks in here. We're 5 minutes after the top of the hour. So let's kick it off. A couple housekeeping things here. So everyone in the webinar, you guys have your video off, you're on mute. But please throw questions in the Q&A that you want Dudley and Toxey to cover. We got some folks live in there to not only help answer them if they're directly answerable behind the scenes, but also to deliver them to myself, Dudley, and Toxey to ensure that we cover those. And then we'll also be doing some giveaways. So we're going to be giving away GameKeeper magazine subscriptions, as well as some onX gear towards the end of this. So be sure to stick around. You're going to have to be around to grab the link to enter for those giveaways. And we'll post those in the chat and the Q&A. So without further ado, we got Toxey Hayes, Dudley Phelps, where we're going to be talking about what it means to be a gamekeeper on your ground. It's a 365-day pursuit that really never ends, and something that Mossy Oak was established and founded on. So really, I want to kick it off. We asked a bunch of questions to all of the folks in this webinar here, and starting food plots was one that came up over and over and over again. And so I'm going to ask a few questions here, and if you guys kind of want to walk through what your beginning process looked like in regards to these questions, that'd be fantastic. So
sure.
What are things that are often overlooked or not considered when you're first starting a food plot? So yeah, touch on that, whether it's too dry or too wet, up high, down low.
Right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
My first thought is location, where it's going to be. We all like to hunt. So you want to have them strategically placed with, wind directions, thermals, neighbors, surrounding cover or habitat. If you've got a field that you want animals to come out into during daylight hours, it needs to be where they're hanging out during the day.
Moisture. If you're in the around mountainous kind of or hilly area, you might want to be where you've got more moisture. For us around here in these drainages, we want a high spot in the low area. So depending on where you are, something where you think you would get the right moisture.
Yeah. And, aspect can be important in certain parts of the country. If it's a north facing slope versus south facing slope, it's not as important in the south. Further north and west you go, it is more important. So, the sun leans to the south during the day, and it can kind of bake the soil, dry it out. So north facing is going to have more moisture. Like Toxey said, lower ground is going to hold more moisture. But there's upland sites with really good soils. It depends on the part of the country you're in and the average rainfall.
So sometimes if you're looking to start completely from scratch, it might be tough looking at a place that has a bunch of scrubby stuff and some grown trees, and you're starting totally from scratch. It can be pretty expensive and daunting. One thing I've made the mistake of is looking at a place and picking a spot that was kind of barren. Oh, that'll be a lot cheaper. Well, guess what? The dirt was terrible there. The soil was terrible. And I've had a really tough time growing stuff there. So maybe take a few cues from what's there. And, I guess you can build up any soil but you're spending as much money on that, and you're probably going to have to do it forever. If you could pick a spot that looks like it's pretty fertile to start with, it'll really help a lot. Then, of course, like always, you want to do a soil test, especially when you first start one.
And so with that was another question that came up a bunch on soil tests is, like what is the pH that you're looking for in a soil test? And then B, how quickly can you change that pH of your soil? Is it reasonable to bring that pH up by 1 in a couple months with lime, or is that a long-term play?
It's both. It depends on the particle size of the lime. The smaller it is, the more quickly it reacts or buffers. It just depends so much. There's different chemical characteristics of different soils. But the good thing is once the lime starts working, as it's working, the plants can tell. I don't think the waiting on it is that important as just getting it out when you can.
And you mentioned what is the optimum pH? Well, it depends on what you're growing. Typically, the safest thing is a neutral pH, maybe slightly alkaline, but you never know. Most stuff I would say that we plant cultivars, we offer probably in the 7s would be good, 7.75. But it could be
broadly, I would say 6 to 7.5, or maybe 6.5 to 7.5. A lot of farmers around here like between 6.5 and 7. But it depends on what you're growing. Some plants aren't as picky about pH. Things like these bigger varieties of clover. We've got a clover called non-typical clover. It likes the pH to be right, but it pays dividends when it is.
Yes, it does. And it tolerates a little elevated pH very, very well.
Okay. So,
but the thing about the point, I think, to the viewers, that there's no magic bean answer from Dudley or I today. Every single place is a very complex difference, and it could be from one end of your property to the other, and go through the paces of figuring it out. And it's fun. I mean, it's like a puzzle putting it together, because if you do the right things, you'll get the results.
Right. A soil test is cheaper than a bag of fertilizer.
Yes.
And it will tell you how much lime to put out. It'll tell you everything. You put the crop that you're growing, you write that in on the form, and it'll tell you everything you need.
Well, especially
tell these folks where they can grab that soil test.
Plantbiologic.com. There's a PDF form on there. You fill it out, send it in with your soil. Land grant universities also do soil testing.
They do.
Awesome. And so when we were talking about starting a food plot from scratch, there was a bunch of questions on the process to do that. Do you spray herbicide? Do you burn it? Do you till it? If you're doing no till, what are you looking for to do in that regard? Can you guys cover some of those things and what you've found to work best when you're starting from scratch?
All of the above.
Yeah.
And we're going to use it depends a lot tonight, but if you're in brushy country, you might not have a lot of big timber and you might could rent one of those mulchers. You could put up a big fire lane around it and start burning it.
That's a great way if be safe. That's a great way to get it ready.
If it's a field that's overgrown and it's just, maybe 1 inch and smaller saplings, you could probably use a heavy duty bush hog. Trying to think, if you've got nothing but timber, hire a logger, get a forester and have some stuff logged. They'll create little logging decks, or you can tell them that you're doing this with wildlife in mind, and they can build you some food plots.
And speaking of that, like if you only have timber, and you didn't necessarily have the means to hire a logger, what's the smallest size of a food plot that can still make a difference?
Gosh,
that's a tough question. If
a tenth of an acre,
yeah. But if it's the only place in a timbered area for a good area, it's going to draw so much to it. It'd have to be several acres probably to survive. So you said being able to afford somebody to harvest timber. Honestly, you should, if you've got any good timber at all, you're not hiring them to do it. They're paying you for your timber. So that should be how you pay for turning it in. In most cases, if the timber's the right species and merchantable, you should easily be able to pay for or come close to paying for all the work. The most expensive thing you're going to do is stumping it. And that's making a deal maybe with that same timber guy and somebody, to go through and digging, mature tree stumps, especially if they're oak and hardwood species. It's pretty difficult. It's time consuming.
And that, that all depends on your goals and budgets. I've seen stuff, folks doing what some of these poor man's no-till techniques, and you don't need to drop a disc, so you don't really need to stump it. You're going to be avoiding the stumps with your four-wheeler or whatever while you're putting seed out or spraying, but in time they're going to break down. So you could take your phone and do some walk, set some tracks, and figure out those areas, and then use your area shape tool and figure out the acreage and plot it out and send that to your forester.
Yeah, he's right about, and not only can you create a great, potentially a great food plot without even having to stump that. Again, there's a lot of work to that, and you need to get someone to help you through that. But you can create some great wild. The point of the matter is not necessarily the quote unquote food plot. It's to have food for your wildlife. And so you can create great native food. And I would be encouraging people to maybe have, if they were going to clear, a 2 acre food plot, to clear 2 or 3 acres and let it come back natural and manage that, in various ways to go along with. Because if you have nothing but timber, you can really help your place just through the timber harvest. But be strategic about it, pick your spots and so forth. The great saying, I was just a little kid in the 60s, and the guy that was the caretaker overseeing the place that I got to lucky enough to go up hunting was almost all timber, and they were complaining about logging and cutting and select cut hardwoods and stuff and clear cutting pines and stuff. And he said, I won't use the expletive. He said, "Oh, blank, don't you know that a chainsaw ain't nothing but a dinner bell to a deer?" And that was in the 60s, but it rings true today.
Yeah, it does. And the new buzz word or buzz phrase, and I saw a listener chime in, they were talking about early successional habitat. And that's what you create when you clear land. All those new weeds grow back. And that's what deer and turkeys and quail and pheasants and everything else likes, is that young stuff.
Yeah, so the key, the more we do this, and the more, as much as Dudley has been trained and has learned and actually put into practice, trial and error myself, more and more and more as time goes on, the word diversity just jumps out at you. So, the first thing you want to look at your place to turn it into what you want is, no matter what it is, it's whatever form of diversity for the wildlife you want to maximize. Diversity, diversity, diversity. No question about it.
So that actually brings up a really interesting segue into a really good question of, how do you evaluate a property? Let's just say you just got a new lease that you have the ability to manage, or you bought a piece of ground. what are your first steps that you're taking to evaluate a property and what it needs as far as, habitat transformation or land management practices in order to improve that property?
And you're firing tough questions. I'm gonna let Dudley take it, but I'm gonna say the first thing I would do is if you can somehow get your hands on the harvest data or somebody you trust that has been on it and get that history, that would be the first big thing you could do.
Sure. And they taught us in school, goals. What are your goals are the first thing you ask.
You don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So you got to know.
And now that I've got this, I'm going to find out who my neighbors are. I'm going to try to get to know them, establish a relationship with them. I'm going to look at the topography, which way are the streams flowing? Where's all my ridges? Where's my bottoms? And start thinking about where I'm going to place all of my habitat treatments to make it have better huntability. And then start thinking about what I'm going to do.
Every place, the great joy in life is getting to do it, whether it's a small place or a big place. It really doesn't matter, honestly. It's like a clean canvas. And so every time you could sit here and talk to us and we could look at it and but you got to go spend the time on it, walk it, do your research, but spending time on it, it will almost always come to you between, getting familiar with it on foot and then looking at maps to bring it to bear so you can really put it in perspective.
Summer, it's scorching. We hit 100 degrees this week.
All of a sudden water and water hose is a big deal we never think about.
We were talking to Craig Harper on our podcast last week, and he was saying, everybody wants to know what can I be doing in the summer? Do I check my cameras and put out my salt? And he's like, yeah, all of the above, but it's also really hot. So whether you've got a new property or an old property, take the time to go out there and just have fun and maybe ride around on your bike and get out and walk around and look at some stuff and brainstorm. You don't always have to be working laboriously while you're out there. Just go out there and brainstorm, think.
And I mean, using the onX Hunt app, anytime you're out there to, drop waypoints or track what you're doing, saving notes in there. I never remember as much from a walk as I think I'm going to. So I'm always trying to mark.
Turkey season is a good walking and thinking time. Summer's a good walking and thinking time. Like you said, you find a cool tree you want to save, all that stuff. You can walk a contour, walk a particular elevation and save a track. And that might be a good, you could get a dozer in there and clear a little fire lane. And that's your new spot to burn.
I honestly haven't been doing this for so long. One of the things that's really been helpful to me is the resolution you're bringing the maps to us now is so good. Even on a phone, you can pull it up and really tell a lot from just looking at, the size of the tree, the canopy, the differences and stuff. Maybe not as much in a real hilly to, whatever, Tennessee, Virginia, something like that. But where we are, where it's relatively flat and the nuances are smaller, you can tell a lot from looking at these maps on onX. Now it's crazy. The resolution has come so far. When you first could look at stuff, it was just a blur almost.
But yeah, I mean, like, look at your neighbors. Do they have a lot of thick cover? You may not want to do a bunch of timber stand improvement, TSI. You may not want to.
Do they have a lot of food plots? Because they'll show up instantly,
Right. See if they've got ag. Look at your onX, see what's growing on that ag.
And so based on what you're seeing on neighbors, the idea that I think you guys are getting at is provide something that they aren't.
Provide something they aren't.
Yeah, water. Honestly, the number one thing is water. And I don't know if you can tell that for sure, but you can tell it just about. And so if you're in an area where water's at a premium, you might ought to do that first.
Yeah. And we were talking about diversity, if they've got a thick area, you don't necessarily need to make it thick right there. You want edge habitat, we like to see where tall, young stuff connects to big stuff. Turkeys love hanging around edges and linear cover like that, where it varies.
Dr. Harper brought up a great point. And I've thought about it before, but he brought it to bear. is that if you're in an area with a lot of ag or a lot of food, I mean, you may not can really differentiate your place with food, but you could create the best bedding place. And quite honestly, I mean, most experienced deer hunters know that's the best chance to see a mature whitetail on his feet is where he feels safe in his bedroom or where so creating a bedding area is kind of overlooked sometimes. It's really almost, you could cut the timber, pocket the money and let it grow up,
Right.
maybe do a little work to it. But one thing he did bring to bear, and he's had a lifetime of research, I felt like this, but he really brought it home, was like, if you do that and you create that as your calling card, you might have the best of all if the food's close by, but treat it with kid gloves. He talked about how little intrusion they will actually take and continue to call that a safe, bedroom or bedding area. And that just struck me. Some of the people I know that are really, really good, not calling any names, but they're well known, are very, very anal about not disturbing that bedding area. So,
right.
I just think it's really overlooked as and I've overlooked it as something to create on your place, especially. And if there's not a lot of food, you're in a big national forest area, and there's miles and miles of timber company land and no food plots, yeah, that'd be the top priority for sure. But maybe some of those other things aren't as expensive or more important, like bedding area and water, and people leave that out a lot of times.
You brought up a couple points, and I have 3 questions pointed at a lot of what you just talked about, Toxey. So creating a bedding area, I mean, you guys talked about TSI and getting a logger in there to harvest some timber. What are some other ways you can create bedding areas, be it hinge cutting, be it planting more native habitat with shrubs? What are some of those strategies? And then the second part of my question goes back to your water. And how are you strategically placing water on your ground? Are you putting it in proximity to food, proximity to bedding? Are you trying to hunt over it? So those were the 2 questions that came to mind on that last segment there.
I'll do the water and let him do the other one. I mean, I would look at you got to get on foot, but you got to kind of take what nature gives you on the water. I'd be cautious about trying to make it so strategically placed to be in the best hunting spot. Because, quite honestly, you might get by, it could be really expensive to create one of great consequence in a place that it's not, hold water or not last. So, looking at a drainage, looking at topo lines and going out there on foot and maybe getting a transit and shoot it. I would create the most I could with my budget with water, regardless of where it's placed, as long as it's maybe not on the edge of the property or something.
Yeah, it depends on where you are in the country. If there's not a whole lot of water around, not a lot of plants that have a lot of water in them, you can create, what do they call them out there? Tanks and things like that. And you obviously won't cover nearby. I don't think necessarily right near it, because it would make it more difficult to get in there and hunt over it. And you may even want to hunt in between the water and the cover. Yeah,
but they're gonna go to water. It doesn't matter. I mean, so it does not have to be close by. Right. They have to eat, but even more than they'll find food and even lesser food and survive. They have to have the water.
Right. And so your question, weren't you talking about how to establish bedding in different
areas? I had 2 different questions there. So the other one is, like, what are some ways that you can create some buck bedding in particular?
Buck bedding, some of that is theory. There's not a whole lot of science yet between, buck versus doe bedding. Deer are pretty hierarchical. Does don't really get along that great. So I really think the more the merrier. A lot of folks that are into creating buck cover will create like a bigger area for does and then move over, 100 yards and create some smaller areas that maybe a mature buck will say that's my spot and do that thing. I would want to have some like mass trees nearby, like in the south, I'd be doing some persimmons. Further north, I may be doing some apples. They can get up and go eat some stuff, that kind of thing. And then, it depends on where you are. Just say you bought some land that's nothing but pastures. You may have to go in there and do some disking in the fall. to stimulate a bunch of broadleaf weeds to pop up the next year,
You can plant some too.
or plant some.
Obviously trees, they're different species to do different things, mass trees versus, but I mean, that's where he's really strong. He knows everything there is to know about them, and you can create those bedding areas with trees too.
Oh, for sure. And you wouldn't want to fill your whole place up with trees at the same time.
No.
You want that diversity. So some of it needs to be thick, some of it needs to be open, that kind of thing. Further north and further west, you can, do some, like dogwood cuttings and things like that, willow cuttings to create cover. You might not be focused on deer. You might want to have a bunch of rabbits and pheasants and things like that.
And when you say willow cuttings, Dudley, like you're just talking, go find some willows, snip them and shove them in the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the further south you go, that's going to be things more like Chickasaw plum, plums, sumacs. More and more folks are sticking with natives these days. But yeah, it depends on your goals and where you are. You may not be in an area that grows huge timber. You may be in a more arid region. And for folks that, want to reach out, Dudley, they can reach you at Native Nurseries and you can help them, strategize based on where they're at in the country, correct? Sure. Yeah. You can email me at nursery@mossyoak.com or 662-494-4326. And I'll talk all day.
Ask Dudley.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. Well, sweet. And now this, I'm sure you guys are going to use that depends word a bunch here, but as you can imagine, these answers or these questions flooded in as far as what do I plant to maximize, the production of my food plot and my hunting success. And so let's break that down a little bit and say, what do I plant if I want to hunt that food plot early in the season, mid-season versus late season? And we'll start there on kind of some different food plot options that you can do for those periods of time where maybe you only get a small window to hunt. How can you focus your land management efforts to be most beneficial for your hunt time?
So food plots, not trees. My favorite early crop is radishes. And all the cereal grains are good as well, oats or even a blend.
Are you asking like bow season, like September, 1st of October early, or the early rifle season too? That makes a difference.
Yeah. So, I guess depends, the South early is different than the Midwest
Right.
early.
Right.
So I guess, maybe speak to, what you'd maybe plant in Iowa for early season, but also Mississippi for what you'd consider early season.
He just said it, what I would do.
Radishes.
Yeah.
Either place.
Yeah.
I love radishes. Sometimes I'll mix some oats or just one of our blends in that's heavy in oats with radishes.
So this year too, we're going to get, and we're all excited, we're going to get the first time in our history a 3-day velvet season in the middle of September. Typically, it's really exciting for us because we've never been able to do that. I've never known it to open before 1st of October. In Alabama, where we do the other part of our hunt, it's the 15th of October. So I'm thinking about right now is if I'm going to hunt something for that, it'll be too hot to get food plot started in time to be a big factor there. My best chance is going to be if I could establish something now that will be good, like the peas that we have.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe soybeans, but that's tougher in a smaller spot. If I could establish some of these like summer legumes, they're going to be hammering those, and I've got them trained going to it by then. So that's what I'm thinking about for early season. But the downside is, you're going to lose them at the first frost.
Yeah, and they like peas and beans better than anything.
Oof.
And if you can keep them out of there, if it's a small area, some folks are using these solar powered fences or something that smells. You could even do it on a portion of the plot and let them eat the rest of it. But yeah, if I'm trying to target a big buck, during that velvet stage, when they're still bachelor bucks and easy to pinpoint, gosh, you're right. I'd be going with a warm season crop like peas or beans.
That's right.
All right. So covered early season. What are you guys doing, for something in that rut time period, to try to bring the does around to, be right in the middle of the action in November, early December there?
Food plot wise?
Yep.
So I'm going to put this in there, and it's kind of an answer, but what I've been crowing about in the last year or two, that just from my experience, the best investment I've made food plot wise at all ever is non-typical clover. And I'm just saying that not to pitch our blend. It's a great cultivar. And what it occurred to me is that, if, with the right conditions, it's going to be tougher this summer, but it's hanging in there so far. It gives them something to talk about, keeping stuff on your plates. They've got something to eat 365 days a year. I'm not sure there's another cultivar that we have, or anybody besides some type of clover, that will do that for you. And it actually really shows out in the wintertime. And I'll say that, especially a stand that it was established and made it through the first summer, okay, which we got lucky. Last year, just like when we had the Luke Combs bunch here, most of their best success, and everybody they brought killed a nice mature deer.
They did.
Was over a clover field, just about all of them. There was one down in the old Nuttall Woods that got one there, but it's great year round. That would be my first priority, so that you've got, and I wouldn't be the only thing I do, but so you get that established, then you've kind of got, like, you've gotten a first base, and you got a balk to walk down to second, because you've got something safe that you're going to have for them. And then you can go with some other food plots and try some other seasonal stuff. Right.
And then, the late season, and I'll say you can add a good blend of that. Yes. Green Patch Plus, it's got clover, it's got brassicas, it's got cereal grains. That's a good option. And then, late season, it's hard to argue with like a turnip rape type mix. We've got a product called Maximum. The deer really hit the radishes first, and then they move into the rape and the turnip later in the season. Further up north, under snow cover, they'll paw it up and eat it out of the snow. But to add to your question, in my larger fields, I usually split them in. So if it's more than an acre or more, I'm usually going to split them into thirds, and I'm going to have a strip of clover in the north facing side of the field that usually stays a little cooler with more moisture and then I'm going to rotate in the middle. I might have brassicas like radish or that Maximum, and then the other third I'm going to have a blend. That way there's something year round, even when your brassicas and your blend has petered out. Right. You've got that strip of clover on the north edge.
One small tip for the rut, if you're timing that and wanting it to be more succulent, and depending where you are in the food plot and the stage of it, you might think about just a little top dressing of nitrogen.
Sure.
About, say, 2 weeks or so before that time period was going to get sweet. Sometimes when you have sudden cold weather, it'll sap some of that, and you'll see stuff turn a little yellow, and you think it's something else wrong with it. It's typically just drain the nitrogen out and need some, and it really will make it, taste better, smell better for them. It will really juice up a food plot just about. There are other foliar fertilizers that probably do it too. But if you can add a little shot of nitrogen when it gets cold, it will be more attractive to them. Typically, clover doesn't need it, but the rest of them will.
Especially on my brassicas, yes, I always hit them with 100 pounds per acre of some type of bag nitrogen, like 3300. I don't know, about 8 weeks after I plant it. In the South, I'm usually doing that sometime in November.
Radishes respond to it really well too.
In the North, you probably do that in October. Give them a little dose to pep up before it gets cold. The soils get real wet and it's harder for them, and cold, harder for them to extract it. So it helps to give them a little shot.
Awesome. So on tacking onto what to plant, there's a bunch of questions, and I just saw one that came in as far as, are there particular blends of food plots that you guys have used and have experience with that are really drought tolerant, really wet tolerance or the inverse of those things. So, you know, like what should I plant if I'm really dry? What should I plant if I'm really wet? And then maybe the things to avoid in those scenarios.
Dry can be tricky for sure. And I think to get around that problem, you know, you can do better soil health practices so they can retain more moisture.
Great advice.
They have like a fungal relationship in the soil with bacteria and fungus and all that, to help them handle the stresses. Another thing you can do is plant earlier when moisture exists. You know, just about anywhere there's moisture in the spring. So you may want to plant, I don't know, corn or sorghum or something like that early on while there is moisture. And
that was what I was going to say.
And then if you have a front come through in the fall, you can always go in and overseed a blend and have some green popping up underneath that.
Some stuff is more drought tolerant, but in general, what he said was a good root system already established is the best drought tolerance you're ever going to have. So,
right. And then even when it's really droughty in those particular areas, like there's places in Texas, or for example, where it may be better just to manage the native vegetation that has evolved for millions of years to be able to handle that area. You know, all of those good weeds that deer have always eaten, and you can also plant them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a food plot species. It could, you know, be something like, you know, ragweed and other wildflowers and such.
But we've got heavy clay soils around here. It's most of my experience. We do have some sandy loam in Alabama. Most of my experiences, so we're getting a little spoiled when that's all sealed over. It retains moisture a lot better than parts of the country. But the radishes in particular seem to be very drought tolerant. But again, if you have a drought immediately after germination, you're probably going to lose just about anything you planted. A good established root system will do more than anything. And so planting early or timing it, you know, if you see a couple of rain, if you get a good rain and then maybe say whatever, 10 days later, a week later, another good rain, you're pretty much off and running on most of the stuff that we offer is pretty drought tolerant.
Mm-hmm. As far as wet, that can be tricky too.
That's harder.
I almost want to say just go find an area that's not too wet.
That's exactly what I would say.
There's a couple of more obscure varieties of clover. I think Allsike is one of them that can handle.
Yeah, there's a vetch.
There's a deer vetch. I hate trying to pronounce it, Ashionomy or something like that. It does well in the south in wetter areas.
It's not that preferred or great of a, but it is tolerant to wet soil. But he's right. I mean, you're really wasting your time, as much time and effort as it takes, and then all the expense of planting and everything as a food plot. If it's going to stay wet, I've got them and I still plant them, and knowing it's going to be good for a week or two. As soon as we get a bunch of rain, it's going to, you know, pick a better spot. Pick a spot that doesn't, and it's not about a flood coming up and going down, and your problem is standing water, you know.
You know, maybe there's something you can do to help help it dry out, you know, get some more sunlight exposure to it, cut a few trees down. So maybe it's too shaded.
Talk to us about Dudley. Hadn't even mentioned it yet. And he's as good as anybody I know, has kind of perfected his own small food plot, you know, low budget, super effective, in actually a better plot in a drought, simply because he's maintaining the soil moisture better. Take them through the basics of what you do.
Yeah. So I refer to that as
poor man's
no-till or throw and mow. Other folks are doing it. It works really well, but in a really dry scenario, and some people are using more advanced equipment than I have, but I go in and I mow. I let that grow back for a couple of weeks, and I burn it down with something like glyphosate. And then I come back a couple of weeks later when it's completely dead, and I throw my seed and my fertilizer and lime, if needed, out. And then I mow it again, and that thatch lands on top of the seed. And so, you know how when you're in the springtime or anytime in the summer, you're driving by pavement and everything's taller. It's because all that moisture evaporates out from that and finds those cracks and edges of that pavement, and everything's taller. And it's the same concept. That thatch layer is trapping the moisture that's trying to evaporate out from the soil, and it's giving it to your seed. And I've had a lot of times where I've done that and it hasn't rained afterwards, and I still have an excellent crop. And so I wouldn't say, if you've never done that, to go do that on all of your food plots, but definitely experiment with it for
exactly. Learn for your own self. That's the best way.
For more than once. And you'll find that it's a really good thing to do, and it works really well. A lot of folks are using these rollers now instead of spraying, roller crimpers. You can even ride over it with a cultipacker and lay the weeds or grasses on top of your seed. And then the seed sprouts up through that. But yeah, I encourage everybody to experiment with some of these newer techniques. Don't do it on a huge area when you first try it, but I think a lot of y'all will be impressed with how well it works and how much money and time it saves, and it's building your soil.
Yes.
An awesome tip there. I love that one.
Yep.
So kind of the last one surrounding, food plots as far as whitetails go, is food plot screening. That question came up a bunch. Are you guys screening some of your food plots? If so, for what purpose are you screening? And then what are you planting to create those screens?
Yes, but I've only done it where, a time or two we grow in the bottom here some giant ragweed, and I'm 6'3" and it's way taller than me, giant ragweed. And we've left that some before. Standing corn is a great one, depending on the crop. We have the whistleback, grows really, really tall, and we've done it some, but we don't do it a lot here ourselves, because most of our stuff is in a timbered area, and so it's really not as effective as it would be in more open country to screen from something. And
Right.
you have to have, independent on what you're screening from, because you can screen from sight, but then you still have scent and sound to consider also. If you're going to screen, it's like creating a sanctuary, so you're going to screen from everything. Some people do what you're talking about, it's not really a screen, but they're creating a travel corridor across a bigger open food plot, right. And that's been very effective too.
I've got a lot of customers that tell me what they're doing. And we've got switchgrass plugs.
Yes,
that works really well.
How tall will they get?
The variety we've got will get about 7 feet tall.
Perfect.
On good ground. I've seen it taller. But yeah, like if you're trying to walk, if you just say you've got a shooting house in a field, you can create about a 6 foot wide strip to where you can walk in and out of that stand, maybe undetected. Or I've seen folks plant them around duck blinds and things like that too. But a roadside, you don't want folks driving by seeing your field. Switchgrass is a effective one. Egyptian wheat works really well. Eastern red cedar is a native.
I've done it with pine trees too. I didn't think about actually planting pines. We had a place that was very open, had a bunch of open fields, even though it had timber. And I guess, good gosh, maybe a mile or so of like public road looking into those fields. So we planted pines. And so I guess because it had to what Dudley was saying, is like, depends on if you want to do it on a year by year basis or you want to establish something permanent.
Yeah.
One of the best trees that people hate them, but Eastern red cedar is a great tree to create a permanent screen for the long term.
It's a native. It can get invasive in the areas of the West and the Midwest where people don't burn anymore or need to be burning more. But you can plant it in rows.
Yeah.
And it works great for screening.
Yeah. And it's there for the long term.
Yeah. Biologic has a product called Blind Spot. That's a mix of taller sorghums. It works really well. There's some non-native options. I try not to push that stuff anymore.
Yes.
Take
what nature gives you too. If you've got big open woods and you're trying to screen, if you cut a strip or create sunlight, it's going to grow up in something thick.
Right.
In subsequent years, you'll create a strip of your own. But cedars are great, but it depends on if you're going to do it for just that season and you're in a hurry and you want to keep having to do it, or you want to create permanent. Maybe you want to do both.
Love it. All right, so we're 45 minutes in here. We're going to drop the giveaway link for the GameKeeper subscriptions into the chat and the QA right now. So follow those links. You have to fill out the little questionnaire at that link tonight in order to be entered for that giveaway. So click that giveaway link right now. We'll fill that out and get entered for our giveaways from this webinar. I think that is super awesome, comprehensive coverage of food plots, pretty much A to Z here on what you can do to improve your ground for hunting whitetails there. And so now we're going to switch gears a little bit because there were a bunch of people pretty excited, Toxey, to hear your take on what you're doing for managing waterfowl. And on top of that, you know, if you want to touch on some other species, there was a number of questions around what can I plant for small game, you know, be it pheasants or rabbits or quail. But really waterfowl was an interest from what you're doing on your properties, Toxey.
That's a big depends too. So I'll start, I'm the big picture guy. I'll start with the big picture, why it's so important, because I mean, for the most part, if we have turkeys, we have turkeys. I mean, they may move to a neighboring property or something, you know, and we have deer, we raise deer, that we have deer. But the migratory nature of waterfowl, and especially we're not in a dense flyway right here. It's so important to have a destination food and sanctuary place to continue to have quality waterfowl. And thank goodness, for whatever reason, we've lucked in and worked over the years, and we've always had some, but we, you know, just developed. So the first thing I would say is, if you have enough room or cooperate with neighbors, is try to establish a rest pond, you know, sanctuary zone, something that you can, you know what, just don't discipline yourself, don't hunt it, so that you have something in the area. And so from there, it gets to be pretty complex as how you would, you know, because you have, you know, the easiest thing to provide really good high energy food is the millets. And like we sell Guy's Choice, we actually have a new blend of millet in there this year. I'm excited about trying. And if you've got water and you drain it, you can just plant it in the mud. That's your best chance to have food. But quite honestly, like a lot of things, some of the best situations are managing native species too. Then you can throw on top of that, you could actually farm something and flood a crop. Corn is a really good one, especially if you get it in time for a little sunlight to come through when it matures. And some of the native grasses that come, especially barnyard grasses, widely known in the waterfowl world, it's really native millet, and it's a great seed to manage for. It is really stands up over the whole winter and doesn't, you know, a lot of, even corn will get that way. Beans are terrible about it. Great duck food, but they just get soggy and go bad, and they don't last through the winter once you flood them. Barnyard grass is really, really good. So one way we'll take a place, if we're going to just create, we have a pretty good, in most everywhere or in drainages, we have a really good seed bank of like, you know, springle top and barnyard grass, especially. There's 2 different kinds, and some more stuff I don't even know the name of. I can tell you real wispy grasses that they like.
Yeah, grasses and sedges.
In some sedges, not all of them, but yeah, especially some sedges. But what we'll do is, just if we have water, we always try to leave it on until mid to late July here, and either we'll drain it and plant some millet. And even though when we get a good stand, it'll have some native grasses with it. The big thing we have to do around here is we have to be able to kill the broadleaves, or we will have nothing. The other thing you can do is start a little earlier and drain it and let it dry out, and actually lightly disc it. Now, you don't want to disturb it too much, just enough to barely disturb the surface. And later in the summer, you're bringing to life the more desirable species, especially the grasses. And so, you know, a lot of times, if you just don't even have the budget, if you could drain the water off, leave the water on, you know, till midsummer, drain the water off and lightly disturb the soil, you're going to wake up some really good stuff. One application of a broadleaf herbicide and you're off to the races. So it depends on what you have the time and the budget to do. I mean, for us, I've learned there is no magic bullet. So we try to do, given, you know, we don't have irrigated farmland. So trying to grow stuff and grow more soil plants, you have to have the moisture part. It's going to be tough this year. I hope we get a bunch of rain. We don't plant anything till up into July, and we'll actually plant some of these, short growth season, interim, 60-day maturity on millets. We'll plant them all the way up to Labor Day. And honestly, with the deer putting pressure on them and hogs now, I kind of like the last second stuff, and it doesn't give the other creatures or critters, as much time to eat them up.
Right.
But there's a wide variety of ways we address it. I mean, from, planting the crop, we've had the corn planted, to planting the millets, which actually I think might be the best as far as what ducks prefer. And then there's the natural more soil management, which I love doing all of.
Yeah. And he didn't get into the army worms.
Oh, that's a whole nother time.
One reason we start a lot later is, you're trying to beat their life cycle or whatever.
It's coming. I mean, I don't know how far. I mean, Chris Paradise is in town. He lives in Northern Ohio, and he laughs at me and my phobia about army.
But they
worms. They nailed his yard even last year in Northern Ohio, so they got that far. We had a great podcast last year with the entomologist that was explaining the march north of the army worm every year, and it's different every year. But I would say at least 10 years in a row here, there's nothing I've planted like millet that I've been able to grow a crop without spraying for army worms. You can might as well write it off. They're going to find it. I think it's their favorite food. It's new, it's tender, it's got the thin cell wall, it's easy to digest, but they will destroy that at some point. So we just have to watch it and have all the spraying equipment ready. Because if you're not ready and when it's small, like under 6 inches, they can wipe it out in just a day or two. And I mean, I've got one spot that's almost 200 acres that we plant. It's actually our sanctuary place, and they wiped it out in like 2 days. Literally. Yeah. It's crazy.
So again, diversity.
Yes.
Plant at different times, plant different crops, do some of the natural, what we refer to as moist soil plants.
Yes.
Plant some of the millets, maybe have some corn. That way you've got a mix.
It's expensive, but you can buy some of these moist soil plants from these native seed places.
Sure.
And you can buy, and if you don't have in your soil bank in your wet spots or places you like to duck hunt and manage, you can I would recommend trying to find a source for a barnyard grass.
Yeah.
I think it's the Kruskali. There's two different types. There's one you can buy legally and one's a weed, supposedly, but they're really good. If you ever get them started in your seed bank, get one good crop going, then you're off to the races, and it'll come back every year from now on.
And then all of this is also going to attract invertebrates. So when all these plants are decomposing, there's baby insects in the water eating all of that stuff and climbing on the stalks. And so having that vegetation there we're not just doing it for the grain, we're doing it for those protein rich bugs. Yeah,
the corn stalks, I think it's the cellulose rich stuff they like better. And so grain sorghum stalks too are really good for those invertebrates. You can see, if you look in relatively clear water, you can see them actually, going into the winter. It doesn't take long before they develop.
Some kind of cover, button bush is good cover in a duck hole or duck impoundment.
One thing I have learned is that if I had to do it over again, I would not have cleared out, or when I would establish some cover, because some of the best spots we have don't have enough cover.
Right. They land in the open, but they like to get underneath that cover. And if you have it present, it's going to make them want to be there more.
Yes. For sure.
No, that's awesome. I think
it's easier to hide from them and hunt too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last question that came up a couple times is, what are some resources that folks can utilize to be more rounded in their land management practices? Be it like fire education, or are there some land management courses that you guys know of that are out there floating around that folks can poke into if they really want to deep dive and learn as much as they can about some of these practices?
Well, I mean, you've got all your conservation organizations,
extension services.
DU, NWTF, NDA, a lot of them have like some stewardship type courses that you can take. Universities have made it a
Exactly.
lot easier these days.
Sure
You can take night courses, you can do online courses, but they have all these excellent publications. I mean, so for example, you could go to the University of Florida website, Forestry and Wildlife Extension. One of my favorite professors is Marcus Lashley.
Dr. Disturbance.
Dr. Disturbance on Instagram. You can go to their website and look at all their publications and even print them out. But they've got they've got the Mississippi State Deer Lab. Florida's got all of that too. They even have stuff on fire. And all of the land grant universities also have fire courses that you can take and become certified in your state as a burn manager.
He didn't mention also too, and although we are not the Mr. Know-it-all like these people are,
we just read
but
what they do.
Yeah, but I would say get your hands on a subscription to GameKeeper's magazine, because we cover so much of that in enough to give you ideas where to go dig further and get sure enough expert advice. Dudley can give you most or point you to someone, but you would be best served to find somebody locally you can depend on, develop a friendship with them. That's a resource for you, whether it's the extension people or your, university, and start to, you can find, with the modern day of electronics and you can find anything you want to know anything about, be honest with you, and research it online.
Not to mention the GameKeeper podcast. I know when you guys, do that every week, you guys are covering all sorts of these topics.
Right. University of Tennessee, Clemson, Mississippi State, University of Florida, all of those land grant universities have so many resources.
They really do.
And extension service, that is their job to teach you this stuff. Yep. I mean, that's what they're there for.
Awesome.
So don't be afraid to just pick up the phone and call them, or, go to their website, print out all their pubs.
Heck yeah. Well, we're going to drop that giveaway link one more time in the chat and QA here. And then we're pretty much going to wrap up this webinar. If there's any last second questions, shoot them out right now. And all right, here's one for you, Dudley. Ronnie asks, my white oak trees haven't produced acorns in 3 years. What could be the issue?
Well, it could be genetic. Some white oaks, not oaks are very primitive. They haven't been improved. So you may plant 10 white oaks and only 5 of them are really productive. Some of them may not produce a crop but once every 6 years. But if they haven't, some things you can look for, they've got to have plenty of sunlight and they have to have plenty of root space. So you may have to take out some trees that may be competing with them. And that will provide more root space where they can get more moisture and nutrients, and it'll also give them more sunlight. But just also be making mental notes. Not all of them are winners. They may provide stuff for insects. Turkeys and birds have to, they house more caterpillars and things than any other species. But if they're not dropping, you may want to take them out. But just make mental notes. The ones that drop every year or every other year, you want to keep those.
Yes.
And the guys that don't produce very often at all, turn them into firewood.
Yeah. That's what I was going to add to what he was saying, is if you find one and you're familiar with one that's a consistent producer, take really good care of it.
Awesome. Well, Toxey, Dudley, I really appreciate you guys coming on here to spread the knowledge to all these fine folks that joined us tonight. So appreciate your many years of diligence on your properties to build this knowledge and your willingness to share it with us. So
well, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah. I love doing these things with you guys, and I know our listeners do as well. We've gotten a bunch of good feedback here. So everyone, have a good evening. Appreciate you coming out, and we'll see you next time.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, onX. See y'all.